Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. I almost messed up there. The videos were in the wrong spot. I almost made a mistake. So we fixed it. It's good to go. Everyone's happy. At least Mike is.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is just FYI, a pre-recorded episode. So we're going to be pre-recording this one. People are traveling again. It's happening a lot these days. However, though, there is a lot of other good links that'll be in the description as well, talking more about this particular feature as we talk about today's episode. And again, with all things, we are still talking about Fabric. I think you're going to hear about it a lot longer here for a period of time. So
I think we'll do a mix. Like, we're not going to say, I think the next 2 months are going to be just Fabric. We'll mix in, obviously, we still work in another tool. I think it's called Power BI. So yes. I'm assuming we're still going to have some topics there too.
I have been, I really like what Alex Powers has done, and I've jumped on his bandwagon. He's been touting this thing called the Fabricators, which is someone who works in Fabric. So I've been building a bunch of like rando fun internet-y things across that. So maybe I'll throw that in the chat as well, or the links as well. There's, in addition to that, you can now go buy or purchase your official genuine Fabricators gear and swag if you'd like to join in the Fabricators I guess movement. I guess we're a movement, maybe all two of us.
What was it? I was switching up like the Power BI user group, right?
Yeah.
And we had generated the Milwaukee Power BI user group, and now it's like the Milwaukee Brew City Power BI platform, and now it's like Milwaukee Brew City Fabric user. I was like, that just doesn't roll off the tongue. And then like when he brought up Fabricators and this, I'm like, oh, that's much better.
That's like, much better.
What are we? Power BI
Milwaukee Fabricators.
Power BI pros. We're Power BI. Well, now we're still Power BIers wrapped in fabric.
Wrapped in swaddling clothes. I don't. What?
It does change the conversation and also the Google searches. If you say I'm a fabric consultant, you're going to get a lot more audience.
Yes.
Just not going to be not be able to help them out as
what
well.
What is your stitch technique for working with?
Is that in Synapse or in pipelines?
Yes. It's interesting how
there you go.
The internet...
There you go. That's another one. How do you stitch your data together across the ecosystem? Oh man, we could go all day with this.
Yeah, you're gonna build a patchwork of.
There you go.
Enriched
shirts on
data.
Shirts, Mike. Shirts on shirts.
Yeah, exactly. Just like your grandma used to make.
Mm-hmm. Well, Fabricators, like technically now takes you into industrial as well, right? Like
it could be,
fabricating your own
supply chain of data.
Yeah.
I like it.
I like to wrap yourself in a cool set of data.
But today we're talking about a Power BI specific component within Fabric.
I would agree, and I think this is part of. I've been also trying to explore a little bit of this feature myself inside PowerBI.com, just to make sure I get my head around it. The main topic for today is talking about Git integration and Power BI, something that we've been longing for a long period of time, really trying to get our head around what this means, how is this going to be used, and I think this, we've been saying it all the time through the Fabric, this is legitimately a game changer. We've been asking for this feature for years as a enterprise BI solution development tool. So I'm really, really excited for this next feature set here.
And I think for all of us have a developer tendency, so to speak. So all of us, when we heard the Git integration when Rui announced it, I think I might have jumped out of my chair. Either way, this was all exciting for us. So if you're new to Git, or this is the first time you're hearing about Git, buckle up, get on the ride, because it's a harder learning curve. No, I don't want to say harder learning curve. It's a concept to kind of understand how the process works. But once you start utilizing it, I'm dependent on it.
Go ahead, Seth. You're going to say something?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll go through my experience as I was learning Git briefly. Git was, in simple terms, it's very easy to get started with. But it does have a lot of depth to it, way beyond what I initially interpreted Git to be when I started learning about Git. So I thought, Git was, okay, copy a bunch of files to my computer, work on them locally, and then commit them, and then push it back to these different things called branches. So it was basically like, I'm just taking copies of files, working on stuff, and pushing it back to a cloud server or a server somewhere. That is in fact true. But as I got into more of the capabilities of what you can do with Git, you can cherry pick things. You can take these files, you can merge things, you can have merge conflicts. How do you resolve that? And it's really made for a team of developers to build in software that we're really borrowing a lot of that core capability from, and now we're bringing it directly to workspaces. Right. So I'm very excited to see how that's going to pan out, because I think this is going to be right now, the way I see it in PowerBI.com, you can only use DevOps today. I'm hoping that it becomes a little bit more open for GitHub as well, because GitHub is actually my preferred Git provider at this point. But for now, it's fine. Like we can use DevOps.
I thought it was any Git type of repository.
So I think the feature is you can use any kind of Git. When you go into PowerBI.com and make a Fabric-based workspace, there's a drop-down menu. You can see the features in there already. You can see there's a Git integration piece. So what I do is I go to Git and I try to change the provider, something other than DevOps. I was unable, and this might have been just me at this time, I was unable to change it to anything other than Azure DevOps. It just was DevOps. It's already linked up that way. So I'd have to imagine that at some point in the future, they'll give you a, hey, put your Git URL here, and it'll just be able to link itself up, just like you would with Synapse. But for now, it doesn't look like you can change it to anything other than DevOps today. But I wouldn't see why they need to do anything special with DevOps versus it's Git, just like GitHub would be. So I don't know. And Microsoft owns GitHub anyways, so why wouldn't you?
Yeah. So I guess you guys are avid users of Git, and Mike, you just outline in the simple process by which you thought Git helped you out. What would you guys say for people just having to come into this and learn the capabilities of Git? Like, what are the core concepts or things that would ease a transition into kind of this murky world of like, I've got to go copy this library to my local or sync, or like what are the core concepts that people need to that you'd convey that could get people started down the path of understanding?
That's a great point.
Connected.
And I think it starts with the complications we've had with Power BI in the first place. When you think about
what Power BI is probably not related right now, because like, what I want to do is on Git. Just talk Git, right?
Yeah,
because then we can talk about like the specific solution, that Rui and the team and everything is, and why it's going to work out well.
Yeah.
But since the concept of Git integration is so new to probably a lot of users, I want to lean into that aspect of things first to like just tease out, like in your experience, what were some of the pain points, in trying to understand how that ecosystem works? What are the things that somebody kind of needs to set up or understand first?
So I would say I'll start off with just a couple things. There's 2 terms, maybe 3 terms you really need to understand first before you start thinking about Git in general. There's this concept of a branch. So you need to know what a branch of information is. So what does a branch look like? And you can think of it as like a tree to some degree. And then the other one would be commit, is your another kind of key term when you're committing something or you're making a change. There's this concept of committing, and there is a principle about I can commit things locally on my computer where I'm working on the files, and I can commit things to a remote branch or something that's not on my local computer. So, branching, committing, and then pull requests. Those are kind of the 3 main terms that I think you need to understand when you start thinking about Git. A pull request basically takes a single branch and tries to merge it with a secondary branch or another branch. So, at its go ahead, Tommy. You're gonna say something.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, I think the big part here is the mindset changes. Unlike everything on your machine now, like OneDrive, Dropbox, or Google Drive, it syncs automatically. The difference here, to your point, Mike, is there's also that concept of repository, where I have multiple, in a sense, think of a repository as a project. I have a Python repository. I have a particular Workspace repository that has the code, files, README documentation, all that stuff within that repository. It's basically like a big folder. The difference is, unlike syncing, where everything else that we do now automatically syncs to the cloud, to Mike's point, I may be making changes on my computer locally. Great example is we have the we could talk about the Tableau editor scripts repository, as how many people open source contribute on that. Where I pull down Mike's repository has all these scripts for Tableau Editor 3, all the macros. I create a branch, and since I'm editing, I can't publish and push out his changes. He owns a repository. But what I'm doing is I'm making changes and updates, whether modifying a file or adding new files or new code. When I'm ready to go, because it doesn't sync automatically, I will try to push, or in a sense, I'll do a merge change. Say, hey, Mike, I've added some files, or I modified some of my files. That has to be reviewed by Mike before it's, in a sense, pushed or published to the repository. Basically the way is, whether you're a team or an individual, there's not this, oh, I'd made a change and now I need to go back and where was that change? I see the changes and I have to actually commit those changes. And I think that's a pretty good example of trying to put the two worlds together.
That is good, because and I like your analogy of like, hey, what we're all used to now is everything syncs automatically. You don't have to save anything. And this is, and in many cases, like, hey, Microsoft tool, you can do anything you want and it's just automatically going to work. And in these cases, especially with development concepts and tools like this, every change is intentional. Right. So everything gets reviewed, and your changes don't automatically show up back into the core code until they're validated and approved. And sometimes, from the description here, it's merging multiple different changes at the same time to make sure that they all work in cohesive fashion in the final product.
And another thing that I think is interesting to note here about Git, and this is let's take the analogy that Tommy was going with earlier, right? We use OneDrive, or we sync a OneDrive location. The file that you're working on, the Excel file, the Word document, whatever that may be, any change you make, the entire file gets modified all at once, and the entire file goes up to OneDrive, right?
And everyone else's computer.
Yeah, you think in this concept of like the entire file. Imagine a project where you have hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller files all collected. And that's what a repo is. A repo is like a collection of lots of little files that many people could be working on. So the concept of Git here is, okay, the repo is a full collection of files. We have these things called branches, and typically you have this one called main branch, which is like your master copy. It's like the thing that you're going to produce. It's your final product. And then if you're going to make changes, you're encouraged to never make changes in main, which my developers yell at me all the time when I make changes in main. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to change this one thing here. And I just whip out this little change in main. And they're like, we didn't do a pull request. You didn't do a branch. You didn't copy down your code. No one reviewed your stuff. I'm like, dude, I was just literally adding a comment. They're like, don't do that. I'm like, I know.
I'm a BI developer in a hardcore developer's world.
Exactly. What happens when two worlds combined?
Yes, I've seen like memes like, I only work in production. Like that's like me.
I'm the same. Sorry. I'm the same.
So not good behavior. Not good behavior.
Not best practice.
And the reason I bring this up too is like there's a strong culture around data development, data engineering, right? There is a very strong, this is something that has been matured over years and years of work about how to develop in software and code. And this works really well. And so there's also this concept, and again, another concept I think that's very relevant here is there's this concept of these files, or this main branch actually lives in two places at all times. It lives in the server where it is officially deployed to a web app or your Power BI workspace, whatever it is. There's a server copy of that, and there's always a local copy of that. And this is what, Tommy, I think you're referring to, right? So the entire repo basically is copied down to your local machine, and you'll have what they call the main branch locally. Your main branch could be out of date or behind what was happening in the service. And so there's a constant need to go fetch the changes, go fetch what was different. And so you're always fetching the different branches and you're collecting that information locally. And actually, for a new user interested in learning about Git, GitHub actually has a really good integrator or a little desktop application that makes it really easy for you to see which files have changed. Are there any diffs between this file that you have locally and this file that's on the server? What does your branch look like compared to main branch, either locally or on the remote? And they call like the one that's somewhere else, the main server, is called like the remote. And so there's a lot of really good tools. As a new user, I really liked the interface of Visual Studio Code because it has a nice little Git integration as well. There's, again, Michael's not a true developer. I'm a wannabe developer.
Listen.
So in the command line, you can literally command line all the different things you need to do to be able to use Git appropriately on your computer. Like Git push, Git commit, Git merge, all these Git fetch, all these commands. And I don't write the commands. I would rather just have a little UI that says, okay, I'm going to commit this, I'm going to push this, I'm going to pull that. There's buttons inside Visual Studio Code and or this GitHub app that actually makes it pretty dang easy for you to connect to a repo, get the changes down locally, and figure out what you made and how to get those changes back into the server.
Because like all things, there's another language tied behind this called Git Bash, which we'll not get into. By the way, Mike,
Let's go that deep.
Because we don't need it. Yeah. There's a new PowerShell module and Python module called PowerShell AI. It's basically ChatGPT in PowerShell, and you can basically say, copy this repo or push the changes, write the code, and I'll execute it in PowerShell. Pretty cool. But we'll talk about that another day.
That's another topic.
That's another day. I want to go off that topic real quick, what you said, because these are really important concepts, because this was the hardest part for me getting started with Git was, why isn't it synced? I don't know there's a change.
Mm-hmm.
But Git is basically assuming, not basically, it's assuming that the type of repo is code, or in a sense, some package. Is not expecting something binary. That's where it really works. If it doesn't, you're not going to store your Word documents and your PowerPoints in Git. It's basically those individual files. And I think that's where I don't think no one has really used Power BI before for Git, because
except Matthias with PBI tools.
Well, PBI tools, but even then it splits up, and it's not a PBIX. You're checking version history.
So I like that's a ton of great beginning stuff, right? But before we geek out into the solution, right? Why do I, as a Power BI pro in an organization, why do I want to put my Power BI reporting into this developer's world?
Because Kami breaks all my stuff all the time.
And Mike makes updates that go, oops.
Yeah, and Mike edits production all the time. Like that's the problem here.
Mike still edits the main branch all the time.
Mike, I still edit main branch.
Well, but that's a good point, though. Like in terms of breaking or changes, if someone, let's say me and Mike were working on a project together, did we move to Power BI yet, or we're talking about Power BI? Just
I'm just asking, like,
why?
What are the use cases? Like, so why do I want to put what parts of the organization? There is a lot of Power BI Pro users, right? All the way down to the person who's just learning it from Excel. Should everybody try to do this, or would only certain areas of the organization be interested in doing that? In integrating your PBIPs, and deployments through
Have
Git.
we talked about that? Yeah.
So I think we should go a step deeper. So I think we should pull back. I think your question is very valid. Use cases, I think, is very much there. Well, let's do use cases. Let's skip the PBIP for now. I think it makes sense, Seth. Okay. Let's do use cases. So one use case that comes to mind for me initially is because there is this concept of a single source of truth of that repo. You can have a main branch, you can have a branch that is test, and you can have a branch that is dev. The way I see PowerBI.com working right now is there's a one-to-one relationship between a workspace and a single branch on that repo. So there's two use cases I can see here. One is I want to have a single source control. I want to have a single definition of a file that needs to move from my laptop to a dev workspace. And then once we approve the changes, I want that same definition to migrate over to test. and I want the same definition after the QA and the quality assurance looks at the data model and everything looks like it's right. Then we move over to prod. So just the sheer nature of moving a full Power BI file from dev to test to prod, I need the ability to be able to track that and be able to note if I need to make changes against those things. So that's just one use. I mean, there's probably another number of other use cases here, but that was just one that I'm thinking of initially. Is you can link different branches and have those different branches go through different environments.
That's probably the most important. Let me tell you, for all developers out there, what you currently have in your folders for new reports. You have sales report and then sales report V2, because you can't if you don't want to work on your current version, you have to create a duplicate. This is life before Git.
Sales report dev, sales report underscore test. Like there might be two of the because you're not using multiple workspaces yet.
Right. And you no longer know how far you are. It's not import, or, in a sense, it's basically its own data set. There's a lot of complications if you're trying to make changes to the original report. And if you're a good developer, you're not making changes to the actual report, or trying not to. And there's a lot, you can use deployment pipelines, but too often you're basically creating a replica or a complete duplicate.
Yep.
Mike's point now, with Git, where that solution comes in, is you can have these other branches that are still connected to the same model, still connected to the same source. You can see the individual changes, not like how far are we away from the original, which is so hard to see in just a normal PBIX.
What'll be interesting to me, and I'm gonna make one point and then pop back to a different one.
Yeah.
Is I wonder if this is going to make it easier to, like, you're talking about dev test prod, but in many cases, organizations have individualized environments for dev test prod.
Yes.
Which
should be seamless.
Well, which we could use, but I wonder if this is going to make it easier to like take the power, like the report side of things, and have that consistent code go through all the environments, but switch models, because the data is different many times between those environments. Right. So either the model and the report are changing every time you're deploying into each one of these environments.
Yep.
So it's not the same thing, or we're somehow going to be able to have a consistent thing that goes along for the ride in each one of those environments.
I think, well, I mean, I'm also leaning on, I have not seen any direct demo of a deployment element that has multiple environments of where you're deploying different, the same report across different data sets. However, what you'd be checking in is you could be doing a git ignore or git nor on some of the definition in this new definition, where you would ignore the model portion of a report potentially, and you would then deploy just the report element or the report objects into PowerBI.com, which then this also gives the ability to us to only deploy the model or only deploy changes to the report. So now in Power BI Desktop, we can make changes and we can pick what pieces of that we're actually going to deploy now moving forward. Yeah. We don't have to deploy all the reports or all the data sets now.
Yeah. And let's keep going on this, like the more granular fine tune. You're taking, like, you took my use case question into the specifics, where the point I would make is, where I was aiming at is, this is like the teams, right? In an organization, who's going to be using this? And it's going to be the BI teams that are already close to the developers. It's not going to be the champions or super users that live in business units that are just generating Power BI reports. Or are you saying now, with your look, that
I don't know,
you would start throwing really heavy technical dev?
I'd go the opposite way around. Instead of thinking about the people, instead of going after champions and the personas of the people working in that, right? So there's like maybe a central BI team, and then there's champions. I definitely think champions have the capability of understanding and being able to build successfully with this capability. It's a lot of UI. It's a lot of clicking on UI stuff. So I don't think there's any reason why you would say the person wouldn't find value from using that. However, what I would say is, I think when you're talking about certified, promoted, or just regular content, I think that's more appropriate, the breakpoint. So you could have champions working on certified content, and I think you would want those certified or Power BI champions working on a certified piece of content, whether a data model or a report. yeah, then I think we're using Git. Then you're educating that champion around potentially using that and integrating with that, because now we're talking more corporate, higher level reporting, and there may be a champion in a department that is doing this for their team.
But this is where I'm not completely aligned with you, right? Because what I would argue is a certified data set or report just has we hope to have SLAs around the data. We hope to have all those things should be in place.
Yep.
But this is how I manage the report. This is not how I manage the data. And if it's coming from a certified place and the person who owns the report is certifying that when the report gets out there, it's valid and good, your line of thinking would force a business user to adopt a very technical tool to click publish, right? And I don't know what the appetite and the reason I'm leaning towards not agreeing with you is the cycles of development and tools like this are put in place for development teams and software development so that when there's consistency and trust in an application being deployed across an organization. So from there, I see your point, but those technical teams also get leeway from the organization in terms of how long it takes to do something that is okay to push through those like pipelines and those code reviews and everything to get something out. The business works in a completely different way. Like the front end is usually like turn it around. And so I'm like, yeah. I'm not disagreeing with you from the fundamentals of like, yes, it like all these points I'm making would be solved by having Git. What I'm butting against is I don't think business would be like, yeah, I'm totally okay with you spending, more time than clicking the one button to validate that the change that you're making or the team has made is a valid one.
I see your point, and I'll raise your point imagine a world. Well, so you don't need to be working in desktop, and you don't even really need a ton of work around going into Git and publishing things to different branches, right? So another avenue of this is, okay, so when we're thinking a dev team, we're thinking like multiple branches, we're thinking, merging commits, doing reviews. I do think there's also this area of what I used to do in the very beginning. I would make a main branch and all the work I did was in main branch. I would commit directly to main branch and I would make all my changes there. So I think that Power BI champion or that business user group would be very comfortable being able to say, I'm going to go into this workspace, I'm going to connect my DevOps to this workspace, and then it just kind of works. You can edit in the service, you could edit in desktop, and now all of that stuff can get synchronized together. So imagine a business unit that doesn't use desktop or it wants to use it less. Now this feature unlocks the ability for you to go into report, edit it, make its changes, and commit those changes right back to the branch.
So
okay, you were an anomaly because I say throw yourself back to like when you were using Excel and you're the guy that's trying to break it.
I'm like writing macros and full up in Excel.
But what about the 95% of users around you, right? What was the frustrating point?
They couldn't do VLOOKUP.
They kept doing the same thing.
If they can't do VLOOKUP,
copy paste.
Shell's not going to be great.
Copy paste, manually move from tab to tab, work through the Excel doc, and why? Because that's all they were ever shown, and the interest to go further isn't there,
right.
And or like the minute you say take a person like that, the minute you say DevOps,
but that's not a champion.
Shut down.
That's not a champion.
Yeah, hold on. If we're introducing these technologies, we are changing processes, and we're also really defining the lines because we're introducing new, to your point, Seth, very development-based technology. This is not just here's a new bookmark feature. Click on a UI, right?
Like, look, you can see the code underneath. But we're like, yeah, and they're like, oh my god.
But because let's go back to our principle that people, process, technology. The technology now introduced is development focused. This does take someone requiring time to learn and adapt because there's a lot more process now they have to learn. This is not just a simple little process change, like just publish in an app and we'll review it after kind of thing. Or put so you're requiring that person now to adapt a lot of process, a lot of intake of time and concept for a business user where this is not their full-time job to be a Power BI developer. And listen, I would like them to. I honestly, like, that would be the goal, but they're like, I'm in marketing, dude. Like, what the heck? Like, why I have to learn what
like, I just want to see my bar chart.
Yeah, literally. Now you're telling me to look at code. Like, wait.
But I would agree with you. Like, I agree with you in a non-champion persona, 100%. This is exactly what I would agree with. Like, what you just described there is a non-champion. Champions are so close to some of your leadership. Champions are also the people your center of excellence is integrating with. I think your champions are way more capable than you're giving them credit to.
Okay, so but at the same time,
some champions,
correct. Like how far along you are in your adoption journey and your data culture, I think dictates like what the level of champion we're talking about. I'm just looking for the person who's writing reporting in that business unit. Right? Like they don't have to be the Uber person who wants to learn Git, right? And I think there's some nuance here. We can argue all day, like depending on the types of organization. I'm just saying, like the Git stuff is probably too advanced for many business users.
And I think what's honestly going to happen is there's going to be a split of the champion. There's going to be like a sub champion who is still in that role,
champion,
and then a superhero,
super champion.
I mean, ultimately, it's actually going to come down to the business, right? Like if the business knows that there's a tool that is very developer centric that would lower the risk to the organization of seeing errors in reporting, maybe they say, learn it. I want everything to go through there.
Right.
But I don't see business units doing that.
I think you're overthinking it.
It's a CO thing.
No. Huh? Think about this, Mike. Imagine says, Mike, you're going to be a finance champion. Here's QuickBooks. Here's some accounting principles. Go ahead and learn it, because you have to do that if you want to be a finance champion. You get some great benefits and you'll be in a demo. But there's a whole other set of concepts here that are outside of just data here.
But you don't need to know them. That's my point. The point here is the Synapse environment today already has this built in. 90% of the people who are using Synapse today don't even know how to check in, check out, do anything with Git within Synapse.
Fine.
There's literally a drop-down menu, so I think you guys are thinking like full like branching and checking in and checking out and desktop and studio code. You don't need any of that. Like, think about how simple this can be too. So this feature spans a very simple user base all the way down to the super technical. So the simplest implementation of this would be is go to a workspace, open up a DevOps Git repo, connect it, done, walk away. Change no behavior, no process change. All you're doing is adding a Git repo to that. The only additional thing you're getting now is by adding the Git repo, users can then go into the service, edit reports. Users can download reports from wherever they live, edit them whatever they want, and republish them to the service. The service will recognize, hey, I have a Git repo attached to this. You just published a brand new report. All the definition of that report is now different. There's no change in any behavior for publishing. The only difference is there's now a new icon in the upper right-hand corner that says the workspace is different than the repo, and you just click synchronize.
I don't know, but that's
hang on, Tommy, hang on.
Yeah.
So this gives you tracking changes.
I'm saying that there's a whole layer of here that's like, okay, I'm not doing any major check-ins. I'm not doing diffs. Like, ignore all that. Yes, I agree with you. Diffs, changes, VS Code, all that kind of stuff. Yes, focuses on the developer. But now I have a full version control of every single file. And now, again, if Microsoft builds the UI around this, where they can say, okay, here is your branch. Here is every single person who's been making changes on things. And oh, by the way, we want to roll back to a certain period of time. Well, now that everything's in a Git branch, you could potentially conceive, and again, I haven't seen the demo of this yet, but you could conceive okay, here's all the different changes that were made. Which change number do you want? And you could literally go back in time and say, okay, I want 3 days ago, I'm going to restore to that state. And it just does it. It's just, it's gone. So, I mean, I think in that simplistic term, I think, so so I'll say this. I'm agreeing with you guys. I do agree with what you're saying if you're talking about, if we're going to use all the features of Git, yes. I don't think you're going to be leveraging full, GitHub for that business unit. However, from a change tracking standpoint, or or even having to do like potentially, well, there's other things here, but I think for a change tracking standpoint, there's none of that today. We don't have any ability to publish something into a workspace and get a state in time what that workspace is. So I think this at a very high level, and I think Microsoft will make it easy for us to be able to publish, edit, build inside that service or desktop, and then just have commits and updates basically on the branch, and that will then change the workspace so it synchronizes with what's in Git.
But there's and I agree with that to an extent, but the problem is if you're having the champion work on something that is promoted and they're just publishing, it's published to the workspace, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Again, you're talking business unit. You just right there, your words right there automatically push yourself into not a business unit. Fine. You're now talking central BI. So like, again, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's the right way to go all the time. I'm saying, I think based on what I see from the feature, you can have a business unit just drop in a Git repo and just continue their daily work that they normally have. Yeah. First change, last change in wins, all that kind of stuff. And so you don't make any change to the existing process.
Well, what's interesting is the rebuttal that I was thinking through was like, okay, well, I already have that now, especially with my auto syncing in OneDrive to SharePoint, and I'm version controlling all the time before I publish. However,
but do we love that?
But that falls apart with the new modeling in the service.
Yes,
because there's no
you can't do that.
There's no sync back to my OneDrive files. So
correct.
I would agree if it's that would be a great or backup, kind of a backup system within the workspace where you would just plug in the Git, and then a new user, when you're publishing or it says you did some change, click the push it back button, and then you'll be safe. And no matter what you're doing, you can always restore it to a certain point in time. So I agree with that. And I think we can move on unless you guys have other areas. So you guys brought up single source of truth, right? Git introduces that. The other thing we talked through, which I think is interesting, is on some of the larger reports, the ability for multiple users to work on different aspects of the report.
Yeah, that's another big one.
And then follow, once again, another developer process where you're actually doing a code review as you're merging these two things back together, so you can actually have multiple people working on different aspects of each on a different report page, which, man, that's mind-blowing. That's awesome.
I think that's part of the wins that we've all been wanting, where the collaboration was more or less impossible. It's amazing to me that we're finally doing this, because in Power Apps, and I think I have a feeling the Power Platform with the Git repos and with some of these push to the champions, I think we're going to see a little more Power Platform and Power Automate to make a lot more of this seamless. I'm
sorry, we're talking Fabric. We don't those tools.
Fabric's part of Dataverse, my friend. It's all
Dataverse. No, it's not. Dataverse was the platform
by Dynamics.
Which all of the that's CSV. No, it's not.
You want to bet a stake?
Okay, data, all the data pipelines, everything that was Dataverse, and all of that.
There's a synchronization between Dataverse.
Data flows perspective, stored everything in CSV files on the Dataverse. Fabric is OneLake based, and everything that's morphed over into there is Delta Parquet. Whether or not these systems communicate with one another, and you're saying that they've said that Dataverse is now part of Fabric?
Not part of hold on.
It's still its own product, but they're going to do a synchronization or a real-time synchronization between Fabric and Dataverse. So Dataverse is still its own product.
They want everything in OneLake. That's why.
Yes.
Right? Because you can extend, and all these tools get much better when they don't have to store in CSV files in a cobbled together way on a back end. So don't bring your Power Platform into here. We're not part of that anymore.
So
I don't even know where we're Fabric.
I save things all the time in LinkedIn posts, and they do not get saved. I'm sorry, that bugs the heck out of me.
So, like Dataverse, so how I think so Dataverse is Dynamics.
Yes.
Dynamics is that thing. And so what I would say is Dynamics is not just CSV files and flat stuff. Like Dynamics is like there's like event hubs, and there's Cosmos DB, and there's SQL databases, and there's so Dynamics has got a lot of things under the hood that kind of makes all that thing work. When when Dynamics materializes its data to other platforms, it looks like Dataverse. So it looks like a series of tables that you can go hit and use or edit or modify. And there's like an integration between what is Dataverse and what the Power Platform and particularly Fabric is going to be doing. So I wouldn't lump them in together as the same.
So, yeah. Well, they've been doing this for a while. So I'll backtrack a bit, but they've been doing this for a while with Synapse.
So Seth just want a steak?
He never said I did not hear. You're on. So.
We never pinky sweared.
Words trickled out. I will bet it's
You can, so basically the same integration's been available with the Dataverse before, where I can connect my Dataverse to Synapse workspace, and now I can do the same thing with Fabric, and I just push the data.
But the synchronous, have you done one to Synapse before?
Well, it's better than pulling from Power BI.
I would agree.
Gosh darn it.
Even syncing Dataverse to like Synapse has not been the most elegant thing for me. I've had some struggles with that.
It's bad. And not to go too random, but my Fabric's freaking out right now. I just was testing something out. And I said, we've added premium per user to your account, like, which I've had. And then it said, you can buy this later in 2021. So a few bugs.
Maybe a couple bugs still so far.
So
wow, it's been around for a while then.
I was like, well, I'll beat you to it, Microsoft. But
that's funny.
Yeah. Okay, so the collaboration.
So let's dig into like what are some of the new things specifically with Power BI files in Git in this integration that obviously we've talked about, like we can branch, we can merge, we can do all these things that Git provides.
Mm-hmm.
What does this look like now? From how did they organize this? How are they breaking it apart? How are they breaking apart the Power BI files, or like what is that?
Mike's new hat.
Yeah. So I tried making one last night. The maker is not built yet, so couldn't make a hat. So it will incoming as soon as the hat making tool in my website works again. So
we now have officially 3 file types.
So yeah, exactly. A PBIX, a PBIT, and now a PBIP, which is Power BI project file. So let's go in deep on like what's this PBIP thing, because this is, I think, really the workhorse of what we're talking about here.
Yep.
So from my understanding, based on what I've seen so far, there is, and whenever you do a full PBIP file, so now in desktop, you should be able to go into the desktop. You should say save as PBIP, and what that'll do is it'll generate a series of files and folders. With that, when you talk about Git also has its own folder structure. There's a .git file, there's a git ignore folder or file as well. So there's actually some files that come along the ride for a Git, and there's actually a new file type called PBIP, which is just a JSON object that has the definition of what report, what model you're looking at. And if you click on the PBIP, it will pick up the folder named the report, and it'll pick up the model named the data model. So I'm really excited to see how this is going to work. The demo only showed 2 thin reports and 1 data model inside the demo, but I would imagine in a workspace you could have multiple models, multiple thin reports, because it's synchronizing everything with a workspace together.
And this is where I want to like lean in, which is some of the integrations or methods that people have had. I don't recognize a thin report, do they? Right. Whereas this integration is fully recognizing the fact that, or supporting, I should say, a common practice of having a single model that supports many different objects. And the fact that was demoed was awesome to see, because that is exactly how many people, how you scale the Power BI solution. Right?
Yeah, totally.
And to be able to manage all of those artifacts on singular models within the same project, it was built the right way. Right.
And
I'm excited. I was excited.
Rui's on point with what he was like. Yeah. He had the right design, and he was definitely coming. So Rui came from the business. He came from like a company that was highly technical. I think DevScope is where he came from. And he was already hacking these files way, way harder than anyone else was at the time. And so he understood what was going on. And so the fact that Microsoft hired him away from DevScope was awesome. In addition to that, he really understands what development cycles should look like. And so I think really he was very much the right hire for that position to build this kind of feature, because this is, to your point, Seth, like, in this PBIP folder, when you're building you could have 5 reports and 1 folder for a data model. Or potentially, I think you could even have multiple data models inside this folder structure.
You say that, and that's where I go, oh, okay, we didn't see it in a demo, but that would make a ton of sense, because then I could have my dev test prod models. All right there. And if I have all those objects in the same project, my assumption would be that I could run my thin reports across each one of those models as I deployed data changes and report changes.
And the PBIP file is the thing that changes what you look at.
Right.
Well, so the PBIP file has a definition of, here's the folder that has the report in it, here's the folder that has the model in it. So you could literally copy the folder that is the model 3 times and say model.dev, model.test, model.prod. And then you go into the PBIP folder and you physically change or comment out or uncomment different things you want. And so you now can then change the PBIP folder. And literally the PBIP folder is just a pointer to where the reports exist and what model you're looking at. So I could take the same report, run it against a model that is dev, close that file back out, open it.
Update the connection strings within it.
It's kind of like that, but it's a little bit more it's like, it's not as challenging as updating the connection strings. And there's this whole issue with the model having data in it, right? So this new method will be smart enough to know, hey, I'm going to pick up this model. There's a whole bunch of tables here that don't have any data in them. Because one of the challenges we have today with checking Power BI files into Git now is that file could be 500 megabytes because there's literally data stored in the PBIX file. So what this method is doing is basically allowing you to strip out the portion of the single file that is the data and say, I'm going to ignore the actual data part, but I'm going to keep the definition of the model and the report. So now you're really checking in just the model report definitions, the metadata, and you're ignoring the data.
Those could go independently too.
Yeah.
Right? Like I could just have model changes that I need to push through and validate that it's coming through.
Yeah.
Are we sure this is not, though, the direct lake, though? This also works with import? I haven't seen that yet. I'm obviously.
It works for import or direct.
So,
I don't think they said.
What about cross workspace?
What was that?
What about cross workspace? If I have a thin report in another workspace, you said it's just a pointer then.
So it depends on what you're looking at, though. Like if you're looking at local, right? If you have it locally,
it's not going to work.
I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Well, think about it. Your direct, not unless both the workspaces are connected to the same Git.
Well, you're not going to pull the model down locally if you're so. I'll say it this way. From what I understand of what I've seen in the feature so far, there is a connection string that's located in there. And if you change the connection string object, you can point to a local model or you can point to a model in the service. So if you have thin reports, there is the ability to say this report points to this service element, which is the URL of that XML endpoint. So it knows, it's going to be smart enough to say, I know that model's out in the service there.
That would make sense.
The tricky part too is you can also do this. I think also you can also put in localhost. So you can also do localhost inside that connection string piece as well. So you could bring down a repo that is a bunch of thin reports. You could bring down a different repo that is your model, load up your model in desktop, change your thin reports in the PBIP file to point to your local model based on localhost, which again, there's already, we already have in business ops, we already have a number of tools that help you find the local host and port. I think you could just pop that into the PBIP file. Again, you're editing the JSON and saying, oh, by the way, don't go to the service, go here to this local AS model, and it'll just work. So there's so much more flexibility now.
The thing that's scratching my brain, though, that doesn't make sense is where does the hook of connecting a workspace to that Git repo play?
I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I follow.
Like I'm syncing objects back and forth with a singular Git repository. What if I'm like traversing? I can't traverse. What if the workspace is owned by a different Git? I suppose it wouldn't be, would it?
No. I believe you can only have one workspace, one branch. So there's
this one branch. Okay, that would make sense to me.
So you
you potentially have a branch that sends thin reports into a different workspace.
Yes, correct. So you could take, okay, I see what you're saying here. So there is patterns in data modeling, right? One is make a dev test prod of just the data sets.
Sure.
Make another workspace or a series of workspaces that is dev test prod of just thin reports. And so that way I can then give metered access to the people who are building thin reports versus the people who are building data models. So, and then the data model connects directly to those thin reports. I think there's no reason why you couldn't have a Git repo that has branch dev, branch model. And so in those branches, you could contain those things. I'm not sure if that's what you'd want to do ultimately. You may actually have two different repos where it is model repo and thin report repo. And then what you're doing is you're then publishing, the main branches of those two separate repos to two different pipelines. And each of those repos, you'd have dev, test, prod in each of those two different repos.
What's your main branch then, though?
Prod. That's your prod workspace. So you could manage it both ways.
Prod workspaces.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would just I'm not as familiar, so I'd it seems like a.
I don't think I would recommend
exercise of figuring out how you would support scenarios where you would have thin report, like a model in one workspace and your thin reports in multiple. Like they could be in that one or they could be in a different workspace.
Yes, correct. I'll play with that a bit more. I haven't gone that deep on them, but I think you would make two. I think in my mind right now, looking at what I understand today, it would probably make most sense to make two repos, one for just the models and one for just the thin reports. And that way there's full separation between those two items. And then if you would have dev, test, and main, and then that would go to dev, test, and your production environments.
More fun to think.
Let's take a quick step back because we literally said, "Here's Git, guys," and we've gone in the branches. What about the collaboration feature? And I think I kind of want to really hammer down on the collaboration effort of how this bridges the user and like even the champion with the developer, because one of the demonstrations Rui did that I think is going to be the biggest, probably the easiest low-hanging fruit, is I can edit in the service and that's pushed back. So I can also focus on doing simple modifications in the service and not worry about my desktop being out of scope or out of version.
How do you handle desktop being out of version?
Well, yeah. So we've now solved that.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, the main, insightful piece that I find here is I can make now. So what this does, this solves the whole problem of I need to make changes in the service. I need to make changes in desktop.
Right.
So now one thing that's changing my process now with this addition, if something is in Git, I'm not as inclined to say
you can't do anything.
You can't edit in the service.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm more accepting of, hey, you can edit in the service, but if you do, we recognize there's a common definition of what this workspace should be. Whether you're looking at desktop or whether you're looking at the service, it's all there. And so now I can say, okay, if you're making changes in the service, my recommendation would be is make sure that there's a minimum of a GitHub repo attached to it. If you're not going to put a Git repo in there, don't make changes in the service because you can never get those files out and you're constantly downloading that file to whatever people are working in. And so another challenge I think that has been somewhat resolved here a bit was you could go get files in the service. Those files are now locked, or if you change them on incremental refresh, and you would for a period of time, if you changed a report and model, if you changed the model and had incremental refresh on it, or changed anything with the XML endpoint, you could never get it out. The definition would never come out to you.
Correct.
So this, I think, also unblocks that.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So now you can say, okay, even though I'm going to be changing, so it feels like what they've done is they've unblocked a lot of that feature set as well. So now I can make changes in the service. I can have it on incremental refresh. I can keep the model in the service and its data, right? So the data can stay there, but I can at least download the definition of that model and work on it locally and then push it back up. And we'll have to see how it finds itself and figures itself out when it gets back to the service. I'm really excited about this, though. I think this is going to be a really big improvement.
What do our overlords say, man, Mike?
Oh, that's a good question. I gotta go. I asked ChatGPT a question earlier. It probably was a very lame question, so it wasn't the best. So I might need it. Tommy, you might have to also spin up a little chat.ai.con here and see what you would say. What would be the right prompt for this one? But I prompted a Bing chat. I said, teach me about Git as if I was a brand new user. And it didn't really do so hot. It just kind of gave me like, sure. Git is a distributed version control system that allows you to track changes in your code base over time. It's widely used by developers to collaborate on projects and maintain a history of changes made by the code base. here's
Great.
some resources that can help you get started with Git, and just basically list out a bunch of websites like tutorial on Java Point, but tutorial on beginners. So
Got a good one.
hope these help. See ya. So it jumped.
I asked, why does Power BI need Git integration?
All right. And is it thinking?
The integration Power BI can significantly improve the development and deployment process of reports and dashboards, especially in larger teams and complex projects. Here's some reasons. I'm acting like it's completely correct. Version control. It is popular version control system changes the files over time. This is particularly useful when multiple work on the same Power BI project. How's it no project? What allows them to overwrite each other's changes. Collaboration, branching and merging. With Git, you create separate branches. Automated deployment with CI/CD tools. Audit trail to see what changes did what.
Mm-hmm.
And it's treating Power BI like it was just a project. It's not saying, our rollback. That's another thing we talked about.
The biggest win or aspect that we didn't talk about at all, which we'll just end with, like, I think is the already developer-centric, probably massive pain point when utilizing Power BI as an embedded solution in an application. This is going to make developers extremely happy that we can now have the Power BI reports and those changes go out with releases of the actual application, instead of being this own independent thing that just gets like, oh, guess what? It showed up. Right? What do you mean it showed up? You can't just deploy changes into the application, despite the fact that that's exactly what we were doing.
Yes.
When you have customer facing reporting, now everything can go along those sprint cycles, the release cycles, the actual planning, and that's super exciting.
So I'm a little scared with ChatGPT because as at the very end it says, remember, as of my knowledge, I don't think there's Git integration with Power BI.
Oh,
here's a whole explanation. It's like, maybe you do.
Maybe you do. So I want to point out your point there real quick, Seth. I think you made a very interesting point, and this is going to be more philosophical in nature, just very briefly here as we wrap up here. Your point around, hey, we have this awesome thing called Git. What you just described now is going to be able to enable us to change our process. We're going to be able to have, so this integration means we need to seriously think about, what does this mean for our team, and how can we get it to how can we use it to change our process in a way that will be effective and safer for us to build things moving forward. So I loved your comment. I think that's spot on.
But it, I hit embedded, but it absolutely rings true for BI teams too.
Totally.
My team will be learning this, because that's how I deliver consistently into the organization on the very pivotal key reports that we need to.
And this is the Center of Excellence needs to do this, needs to understand this, and then communicate, here's the new process we're going to be following. Oh, by the way, we're not just whipping stuff out the door anymore. We now follow this. Here's what it looks like. We're going to do these things. We're going to have these reviews. We're going to have this check-in, and then it will get to the workspace. So this is a brand new process we need to develop. How to use Git in your teams, and what does this look like for production level, certified data sets, and document that process, put it in your Center of Excellence location or your community site, communicate this is occurring, so that way when people say, hey, I need this one quick change, that's going to get it in our next release cycle. That's what this is going to look like. So now there's an expectation being set from the BI team back to the rest of the organization. There is an actual process now we're following.
We got to wrap, but this also points to a lot, Tommy. This points to a ton of the problems that you surfaced a long time ago, where it's like BI teams don't have, they're just constantly under barrage, right?
Right.
This actually would be the push where a team could be like, hey, we need sanity. We're going to bring some of these processes into our life, right? We're going to use tools that allow us to create sprints and a backlog, and we're going to release these things through this managed, way in which we have Git, and we do these releases, and the push back into the businesses so we can guarantee accuracy and whatever, right?
Provide the justification.
This is now, now there's a realm where you can not hide behind, but push back and say, we want to deliver the best thing for you.
Now you can really
give yourself you can give yourself some space, removal and manage your area.
I've already added 2 topics to our backlog about the BI teams at Git, where And that's the thing. I think one of the biggest takeaways from this entire podcast that we've done was that mantra of people, process, technology, that I don't know about you guys, I apply in every call that I have, in every situation that I'm in. And you think about the new technology being introduced, this has a profound effect on that process. So, Mike, both your points, which I could get into ad nauseum right now, but I won't. I think these are great places that we're going to continue to discover.
Awesome. Well, with that, let's wrap it here. Thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate you listening to the podcast. It's been super fun, again, as always. So thank you very much. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere they're available, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. If you want to learn more about Fabric, or if you want to hear us talk about certain features, there's a mailbag on the PowerBI.tips site. So make sure to go there and join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. We'll catch you next time.